Hi, I'm Kelly at Book and Paper Arts, and today I have another way to use up our tiny pieces of paper scraps by turning them into patchwork paper scrolls. These are a cool way to make one-of-a-kind paper ephemera using up your tiny paper scraps. The inspiration for these clearly comes from oops, that doesn't want to let go, from a time when all books were scrolls. Before that we had a book like this, all books were on a scroll. And so today it's actually a kind of a book structure for artist books, scroll books. Let me look at this. One of my inspirations for this also was from the artist, the Japanese artist, Yuko Kimura. And she makes these scroll books, art books. Look at those. Using paper. And I've been looking at these for a few months, and I decided I wanted to try to make my own. I am going to try to make more of an artist book later, but first I wanted to use up some paper scraps. So another inspiration for these comes from Catherine at K3N Cloth Tales. That's a channel here on YouTube. Catherine makes journal arts and stitching and textile arts. She has a video showing how she makes rolls, but from fabric. She calls them meditation rolls. They combine patches of fabric with slow stitching. And if you haven't seen that video, you really should. So I'm putting a link to Catherine's channel, K3N Cloth Tales, in the text box below this video. So you can go check that out later. But today we're going to make them with paper. They're charming and decorative as is, but you can also use them for fodder in your journals, and I will show you that near the end of the video. If you like journal arts, if you like book and paper arts, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and be sure and turn on the notification. And you will have more of them in your life. Let's go make paper scrolls. The only materials that you're going to need today are paper scraps, some kind of glue, and a stick or a spool. For scraps, these are pieces that are left over from just previous book arts, journals that I made, handmade books that I made. If you do not have a stash of scraps, you can easily make one by tearing up magazine pages and text and just anything. These are some paper napkins. So go tear yourself some scraps. For glue, I use acrylic gel medium because I do. But you can also use a PVA, that's a white craft glue, or a Mod Podge. You can also use a glue stick. For a stick, you can use something rustic. I've got one I'm bringing in tomorrow that's got some moss on it. This is a handmade clothes peg. I'm going to see how that's going to look. And you may also have some spindles or spools. This is not vintage. It came from the craft store. Optionally, you may want to use some ink or stencils, watercolors, things like this to add some embellishment and mark making when the scroll is made. You also want some kind of paper as a backing. It is possible to just glue the scraps to each other and have that be the scroll, but it's very fiddly. And for the first time or two, it's going to really help if you've got something to put the scraps onto and then roll the whole thing up. You could use mulberry paper, rice paper, even just copier paper or sketchbook paper. I'm going with tissue paper. It's this is just, it came from something that I bought online. I don't remember. And so it's a free art supply. The only hitch is it's very yellow indeed. And that's not in my palette today. But you know, one of my first rules is use what you got. Don't wait until the right stuff comes along to start making. You're going to start making and then we'll get the right stuff later. So I did what any self-respecting mixed media artist would do. You know what it is. I tore it into strips, the yellow tissue paper, and dumped the whole thing into a bowl of coffee. And it's still on the yellow side, but now it's a much more neutral palette, which is the kind I like to work in. So we are good to go. But use whatever paper you got. Let's have a look at some of the scraps, shall we? This is from last week's video where I talked about doing mark making on text to make fodder. So now we've got fodder and I can add this to my scroll. If you missed that video, I will link to it in the text box and you can go back and find out how to make fodder out of text. This is from a crazy old project I did about 4 years ago. I just printed up some font on tissue paper, some pieces from magazine pages, some text. This was vintage handwritten, so I save every script scrap. More magazine pages, a map. It's from an atlas. I got at a thrift store from the 70s. It was like $1. Some sheet music. These are scraps from paper napkins that were turned into paper. And now you can see it tears easily. It's crisp. Sounds good. If you missed this video, how to turn a paper napkin into paper that you can then fold and use and tear, I'll link to that as well. So I've got bunches of scraps of those left over from making that video. You get the idea. Now to put those scraps onto the backing, the tissue paper or whatever you're using for a backing. I had 2 strips and I glued them together to make a long strip. This is 29 by 3 inches and that is 80 by 8.5 centimeters. But you can make it as short or as long as you want. And I'm just going to start gluing for a bit. You can do it with teeny tiny patches. I have better luck if I put some medium-sized ones and then add teeny tiny ones to that. Let's see. Got my gel, glue, and just going to get that ready. And put that down for my beginning. The first one's the scariest. After that, you'll be off and running. Let's see. You know what this is? This is a bit of like a cloth paper made from momigami, and it's where you need a magazine page or any paper, but I did it with a magazine paper until it becomes cloth-like. And I'm just going to take a piece of that. If you'd like to see how to make these, I have a video showing how to make this cloth-like paper from magazines. Which way? Which way? That, that. And it is kind of, it's got a wrinkled, like a crepe texture to it. But that's okay because these scrolls, the ones I'm making, are messy. And you can see that I just tore that by hand. It's not perfectly measured. You can do that. You can trim these perfectly if that's your style. It's not mine. Let's see, here's a bit of paper napkin. It's stiffened with paste. Yeah. The thing about this, making these, is that it can be very, very meditative. It can be something that you do mindfully that helps you center. Or it could be something that you do mindlessly in front of the telly, maybe. You know, maybe you just need to zone out. Or you can just keep a big old pile of scraps and your scroll at hand and just add to those while you're watching or listening to a podcast or music. Let's see. I'm going to add these, this is just from a magazine, some birds. It's glossy, and glossy's fine, but I actually am not the glossy type. Plus, if I want to add watercolor or ink to this, that glossiness is going to repel the liquid. So I'm taking a sanding block and rubbing a lot of that gloss right off. It's also going to age this a little bit, which I like. If you'd like to see a video on making some gloss, taking the gloss off of your coffee table pages, your magazine pages, I have a full video about that too. So you can find links to how to degloss your pages, how to make the paper fabric. They're all in the text box, and you can just go on over. Let's see. Yeah. I'm going to do that asymmetrically, and then we can take some little bitty bit there. This is a little bit of a scrapbook paper. Yeah, that'll look good. So I'm just filling up the spaces. Let's see. This is one of the circles that I made last week when I did a video about how to use text as a visual element. So it's just a circle cut out of a book page with some watercolor on it. Let's put that there. You know what? That's even better. I like my asymmetrical. I'm not going to go with that, but you know what? This is a little bit of birch bark. It's just actual birch bark from a tree that I found after a storm here recently. So I'm going to try adding some glue to that. Very gently. It's pretty delicate. And I I can glue that here. So you can see the strip is starting to take shape. It's completely abstract. It's not particularly beautiful yet, but that's because I'm just starting. We're going to add layers, and then after it's done, some color and embellishment. So let's just keep making patches. This is the finished first draft. You can see I just continued on with more of the magazine pages and some wildflowers from a book. A little more birch, just bibs and bobs. It already looks pretty good, but what I'm thinking is I want to, and this is optional, but I think I'm going to break up some of these lines. And for that, I've got a stash of even smaller scraps, really quite thin. I can go in here and add these where there are some, like there, where there's a really, the patchwork is a little bit cut and dry. So let's go ahead and add. So these are some wildflowers from a field guide. I use this a lot, so I have a lot of scraps from that field guide. And now that's breaking up that line, making it even more abstract and pretty. Let's see, I have a bunch of these little handwritten torn pieces, just like little sizes. And they can go, see, how about here? Yeah. So you're just adding messes to your mess. I think this wants something right here. And, well, I've already got some of that tea-colored napkin, but let's use a little bit more to soften that edge. You just make it up as you go. Please do not overthink this, especially since we have another layer or two to go. And it's going to look quite different. Not completely quite different. I think that line is a little harsh. You know what I've got? There we go. I've got a postage stamp. That'll be perfect. Yeah. So this is the second pass. And as before, this already looks good, and you could use it as a book scroll, or you could tear it up for fodder and ephemera. But I know I want mine to have more texture, layer, and more distress. So I'm going to show several different mixed media techniques. We're going to be adding some drizzles and splotches and marks. This is an acrylic marker. Acrylic because it's going to stand up to different, let's see, wrong way. These patterns, it's nice and strong, robust. It will also work on these semi-glossy things. It's going to pop there. So you can go throughout and add marks. This is a white one. And let's see what we can do. Oh, so we can go with the white one. If you have a white pen. And then you can work into these darker elements and add some patterns. And so if you go throughout your scroll and you start adding these, these other elements, it's going to add some layer. If you don't have acrylic pens, you know what? This is a soft chalk pastel, and they are so easy to find and use, and I am crazy about chalk pastels. Again, what they have going for them is that they are very robust, and they're going to stand up to a lot of this busyness that's already here. So it's going to add layer and contrast. I like this color. Pull that out, and that's going to soften some of that blank area where the text is, and soften the text and soften that off-white. Another version of this is to use water-soluble sticks, pencils, crayons, whatever you got. This is Derwent Chunky XL Graphite, and I use these all the time. I love them so much. I like the colors. They're kind of dusty. So this had kind of a hard, a bit more of a line than I wanted, so I've gone around that with the leaf green sage. And this is also the green. And then I'm going to go here where it's pretty messy. We need something a little bit robust. I'm going to add some of the blue. You can smudge these dry, but I really want to activate these. They're water soluble, which means that when you get them wet, they turn into a kind of an ink. You see that is moving down into the wrinkles, softening those lines, adding a little bit of mystery. Let's see what happens when we do the green. All right, it's standing up to a lot there, but I kind of like that because it's going to become part of that now, like this. And there's some green here around the foliage. You can see how once it gets wet, and we can work that into that text, that negative space, and let it drizzle onto the stamp and what you will. Here is another one that I made that is, it's a bit more narrow. And you can see that I have not really softened the edges on this one. Not with mark making, although I might in going on. Right now I'm going to soften these edges by adding some drizzles. I know drizzles are not for everybody, but I love them so. You can use watercolor, watered down acrylic, whatever you got. I am using ink. Now this is an ink that I made from onion skins. And I'm just going to add it here, with a pipette. And then when it gets good is when you activate it with some water. This is just some water in a mister. You want to make sure you got something on your table because it is going to make a lot of itself. As you can see it doing right there. It's bleeding into the edges. Just move that around a little bit. Add a little tint there. Let's see. I've got, so that's kind of a red color, a brick color. I also have some blue. This is just fountain pen ink. And I've diluted it a little bit with water. So, add that. Just feeding it along some of these lines here. And you could leave it like this. That's actually going to look good when it dries. And I might. Let's see what happens. Well, actually, let's just move that around a little bit. Because it's been diluted with water, it's already moving around a good bit. And you can see it's going to leave a seam there. So I'm not going to overdo that one, just a smidgen, just to get it to work in to those spaces. Here is another scroll, and I have not softened the edges yet, but what I have done is I painted it with some coffee. And I didn't soak it in coffee or tea. It was still damp, and I was afraid it would break. So instead, I just took some coffee and painted it over it, and that's taken away, that's giving it a little bit of an antiquing, a little parchment-y look to it. But now let's look at softening those edges with stencils. Stencils, I love you. This one is by Tim Holtz, and it's some bricks. And I'm just going to first show it with a stamp pad, old school. And I'm going over several of the sections so that is kind of pulling the stencil, the pattern is pulling them together. Softening that line, adding some interest, and pulling them together. Let's try this stencil, which is some cracks. Let's see. And for this one, I'm going to try using a spritzer. This is going to be much, much messier. You're going to have less control, but I'm here for it. So this is ink and water in a mini mister. Wear gloves if you're squeamish. Nothing wrong with that. And I'm just going to let that dry. That didn't give as much drama as I hoped, but it did add some mark making and add some texture there. This is a stencil with birds, sort of kind of abstract-y birds. So let's get this one. Where will that go? Yeah, maybe here, over these two different parts. For this one, I'm using Distress inks. Distress Stain. I don't use these very often, but I think I bought them when I had a coupon. I'm sure a few of you know how that goes. So let's just play around with it today because they're here. Yeah, I think that's going to work. So I'm going to add some Some abstract birds there with some ink. They don't exactly look like birds, but they are softening that edge. They're adding some interest and embellishment. It works. While we're at it, why don't we look at something that is stencil adjacent? Bubble wrap. Bubble wrap is not very good for the planet, but as long as they're going to keep putting it in stuff, let's turn it into free art supplies. This is an ink pad, and I'm just lightly rubbing it over a little bit of the bubble wrap. I'm going to activate that ink with a very light spritz of water. Now come down here. And that's giving us some marks, some abstract marks. I think I'll do that again. I'm going to do that again so that we can bring that line up. And you don't have to have stamp pads. You can use ink. So now I'm pulling those bubbles, those marks, across several of these pieces, softening that edge. And here is my favorite stencil method. And if you've seen my channel, you've seen me do this a million thousand times. I put a very, very light spritz of water. I'm going to go over some of these kind of spaces with a little bit of the white, where the text is. And I'm using a soft chalk pastel. Now, these will not go in unless you help them. So, I'm using those cracks, and now I'm going to work that into the slightly damp page. You can really work it in. If you really rub it in, you don't have to fix it. It will fix itself. That's better. Okay, see how that's really left some dramatic marks, and it's starting to pull these sections together. Again, you can fix this if you want to with some spray fixative. I find it's going to stay. It should. If you let it dry, it shouldn't move much. Moving on to splatters. Another way to soften those edges and add texture. I have some, you can add splatters with a paintbrush, just by tapping your brush like this. Today I'm going to go full tilt and use this toothbrush. This is some walnut ink that I made. And if you'd like to see how I made the walnut ink, there is a process video here on YouTube, and I'll link to that. Okay. Ready? 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 For goodness sake, cover up your clothes, your shoes, and your table. I did this once while wearing off-white, and I still can't. It's still too soon. Can't laugh about it. Let's see. All right, that's looking good. Now, let's see. Let's put some drama here. This ink, again, this is the ink I made from onion skins. And I have this one in an online class that I will link to. Okay, that's giving me, well, really big splotches, but I like it. Okay, so let's go up here. It's because I didn't tap my brush enough, but I like it. So let's leave those, and then we're going to put some smaller ones here. Again, over 2 or 3 of these sections, and that will pull them together. Gonna let those dry. And then, just to mix it up, let's do some gesso. I'm loosening the gesso up just with some water that I spritz there. Let's see, where would this go? Yeah, let's do it here with his darker colors. And now I'm just gonna load up my brush, tap it off just a little bit. Whoa, yes. Okay, so that's definitely adding texture. And I'm gonna do that here, where it's gonna actually move into the ink splotches. Do a little bit there. Now to roll them up. This is that spool, and I have glued just like a ½ inch there to the spool itself. And I'm going to feed that into it. So we can actually look at the finished scroll as I wind. And now I want to anchor that. Let's see, I've got some, nope. I have some purple twine that would look pretty cool, but I'm gonna go with, I've got some taupe sari silk. Use what you have. You can use ribbon or lace or twine. Go around a few times because that's going to be part of the decorative element of the spool. And let's have another look at this now that it's dried, before I roll this one. And what I'm going to do for this one is I'm going to roll it onto a twig. I'm not going to try to glue this down because I think because of the bumpiness of the bark, I'm not sure it would stick. So this one's going to be a little bit more loosey. These are the completed scrolls. Now how to use them. You can keep them as purely decorative. You could make them into a mixed media kind of a structure. You can just put them somewhere being all adorable. And you can also use them in a very, very practical way. As fodder. This scroll structure is a good way. It weighs very little. And now that you've made your fodder collage, you can turn it into pages and elements to use in your journals or other mixed media work. You could just tear off a bunch there and glue that in right there. But you know what I'm going to do? I'm actually going to make this into a page. No, I'm going to rough tear it very carefully. Yeah, so I've got a deckled edge there. Now I can fold it and add it to my journal. So you could just take your scroll of your handmade fodder from your tiny paper scraps that weren't doing you any good before. And now if you've got an art date, if you are on the road, you can take it with you And hey presto, start adding it to your journal pages, or what you will. If you liked these paper scrolls, if you like this video, please consider helping to support this channel and videos like this by going to Ko-fi. You can make a one-off donation of $5 or make a monthly subscription and get a few extra goodies from time to time. There's a link to that, to Ko-fi, in the text box below this video and in the first pinned comment. Also, please check out my online classes. If you have any feedback or any questions, please let me know in the comments and we can all compare notes. I will be back in a few days with another journal video, so please join me. Until then, get up and go make something.